So that was
Okay,
fun.
guys, I think we're going to get started. So you're in tech stack. Hopefully that's where you wanted to be. Sorry. Behave yourself.
Sorry.
So just real quick introduction for the panel. This is David Walsh with Web Publisher Pro, Jim Brady, newsman extraordinaire, and Merrill Brown with the News Project. And so take it away, guys. I just want to maybe kind of tell
Why we're here and what we're doing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You can start, Tim.
Do I get to start? Do you want to go first?
You should start. He's on the far right. Save the best for last.
No.
Go ahead. David Walsh. Company's called Web Publisher Pro. I manage publisher sites for publishers all over the country. So we build and do development design for hyperlocal news sites, city and regional magazines, parenting sites. We manage somewhere in the 70 to 100 site range now. All of our sites together get about 100 million monthly visitors. So we're familiar with the tech stacks.
Jim Brady, and I'm on this panel because my company, Spirited Media, is part of a project that's been hinted at but not really fully blown out yet about a project we're working on with News Revenue Hub and WordPress to build a content management system for mid to smaller local sites, specifically with the idea of having a set of requirements that are specifically tailored for local sites. And I'm glad to talk more about how we got there. We haven't announced it fully yet because the partners are announced, but the funders are not yet. We're still working on just finalizing some paperwork before we announce funders, but that's why I'm here.
And my name is Merrill Brown. I'm the founder and CEO of the News Project, Inc., a for-profit company that is trying to drive way down the cost of starting and operating news and information sites. We're building a very large chunk of services on WordPress and also offering startup companies and existing news sites a variety of consultative services to help them use the platform. Basically, we think of ourselves as news site in a box with everything you need to start and operate a site at a price point well below many people operate their sites today.
Sounds like he's done that before.
We've done that before. You've done that before as well. Yeah.
Not as many times.
I made mine up as I went along.
But I think we're obviously all chasing the same issue, which is just the issue of my 2 cents on it is that I've talked to a lot of people at this conference who have started sites, and you can get up on WordPress or what other content management system you want to get up on, but there's an awful lot of that doesn't come with a business model necessarily attached to it. It doesn't come with tools built specifically for local. And so I think, over the years, is obvious. That's why we're all up here. Is it's obvious it's a problem, and it's obvious. I assume it's obvious to everybody here that it's a problem, or else you'd probably be in another session. And I think we're all attacking basically the same thing, maybe slightly differently, but not wildly differently. But
The overarching premise that I think we're all here to support is that the world needs more news and needs more investment in news to try to make that happen, whether it's philanthropic investment or commercial investment or a couple people sitting around a coffee table trying to solve the problem of news in their communities. And I don't have to tell Lion members, it's all way too hard. We've got to make it simpler. We've got to remove the friction in the process, maybe even take tech out of the news organization itself and give it to somebody else like Spirited Media or my company so that you're not spending money and time when you ought to be putting words on a screen or on a piece of paper if you're printing. You ought to be focused on that and not on lots of things that too many editors really don't understand, often don't manage as efficiently as they can, and spend way more money than they should. It may not be true for Lion members, but in people starting sites around vertical categories, sometimes $250,000 is spent up front. And we would argue that's wasted money focused on needless UI when UX is way more important than UI in the world we live in today. And they ought to cut the cost of that way down and devote that money to hiring reporters and editors to make their products better rather than thinking through and overthinking the issue of launch.
Yeah, and when we were ginning up this project, one of the questions that came up was, what about Arc or what about Chorus? What about these content management systems that are already out there? And I think we all know, like, they're aiming at a level that's far above what most of us are able to afford on a monthly basis. Like, if anybody here can afford Arc, more power to you. I want to talk to you after the session and find out how you can afford Arc. because it's great, but it has a lot of tools you don't necessarily need. What we're trying to do is underneath the iceberg metaphor. Most sites sit underwater on that one. They're looking for something that's pretty simple, cost effective, does what they need to do, but they can go focus on the journalism. To Merrill's point, I think that's what we're aiming at, and there's an unbounded number of sites that fit in that category, and probably not that many that fit in the category that can afford the really top of the line content management systems.
So you said about tools that are not necessarily something you need. It's easy to go see something shiny and think it's something you want to do. So can you give me an example of what's something that maybe they have that we should really focus on?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's. I'll give you an example of my own experience. When I was running WashingtonPost.com, we designed a new content management system, working with one of the consulting firms. Whose name I just lost. One of the big consulting firms, Accenture, came in and they helped us design a new content management system. It's like bright. They put a lot of bright, shiny objects in front of us, and it was like, an internal communication system for our content management. So it'll help with workflow. Like no one ever used it. Because we had, email, instant message, phones.
Today we have Slack.
Mouths. We had all sorts of ways
to talk.
Today we have Slack. Today we have Slack. And so we built all this crap into this system, and we use 10% of it. Even a place like the Post, which can use a lot of things. So it's not that I necessarily have like an exact thing, but it's like you always want the thing you see, but then you really have to ask yourself, like, is this an edge case or is this something I'm going to use a lot? Because we had a lot. The metaphor I always use is, if you've ever seen the movie Platoon, or a scene early in the movie when Charlie Sheen's just gotten to Vietnam and he's lugging around like an 80-pound knapsack, and Willem Dafoe, who's been there for a couple of years, just says, "Give me that." He takes out half the stuff, throws it on the side, and he gives him back like a 10-pound knapsack and says, "These are the only 5 things you're going to use." Right? And I think there's an element to that with content. So it's deciding what to say no to, not because it's not a cool thing, but you just kind of know at some level you're never going to use it, or you're not going to use it enough to make it worth paying for.
Yeah, one thing that I see is a lot of times people want reporting, like really a lot of in-depth reporting. Like they want to analyze it, look at it, and that's great for like the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then you just, you never look at the reporting again because you understand.
You talk about the analytics?
Yeah.
Yeah, different types of reporting. A lot of times, drilling in on page, what parts of the page get the most clicks and views, and after a while you just realize it's the top of the fold, basically.
Yeah. Well, the rule we came up with when we redesigned the content management system, because not too long after we paid a lot of money to get it designed, we decided to scale it back some. It became, if you start to describe a feature by saying, "But what if this happens and then that happens? I don't have a tool to do this." It's like you've already got 2 qualifiers in there. Like, how often do those 2 things happen? And the answer is probably not that often. And so don't build things that are trying to predict a series of events that probably will not happen very often. And the data problem is a huge one. I mean, because data is like water, but if you're using it to grow plants, it's great. If it's just a hose running into your yard, it kind of creates some problems for you. And a lot of people don't really use the data. And I know data is a big part of what you're building, right?
But smart data that is accessible.
Right.
And on a landing page that you can easily get to, and will have your KPIs built in it rather than having to figure all that out.
Dig through Google Analytics and figure out.
Right. But just to address that point first, my first point was about design and UI, and we're building it in a box. So everything's not going to look exactly alike. You can have red and she can have blue, and we've got 100 templates we're ultimately going to build, and it's just fine. But to spend tens of thousands of dollars on design because you have some editorial point of view that this is pretty and this isn't, total waste of money. What's important is the user experience, how we're selling the content to the user, and how, in the world we live in, we're maximizing the opportunity to get consumer revenue, which should be everybody's number one strategic goal in this room and at this conference. I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
I want to ask kind of the reverse question of what he asked. Jim, you talked about tools that small publishers need.
Mm-hmm.
What are those tools? I'm not real clear on what problem you're solving.
Yeah, I think local. There's more local publishers than small. Yeah, I think it's obviously trying to be able to do some things with this location, like automated location, rather than just it's like being able to map, being able to do things. Because we all know that in the markets that we're in, the difference of a mile could be the complete difference between 2 neighborhoods. Whereas at a global level, it's nothing. But for us, it means a lot. So being able to geocode a lot of things without having to sit there and do it yourself, but trying to use intelligent tools to try to predict, where this story, what are the points of interest in this story, and being able to create some kind of data set so you can actually redeliver news about that. So if you get somebody to the site for the first time in a particular neighborhood they're reading a story about, how do you make sure to show them, hey, we got all this other stuff in this neighborhood too? Which you can do lots of ways, but one way is by trying to pull the location. And others, because we're working with the News Revenue Hub on this, is also a membership program that's part of this. If the goal is, it's not something one has to do, because not everybody wants to do the membership model, but if you want to, then obviously this would connect to that in a way that would provide some other tools that would be helpful in that regard.
Yeah, Jim, you said you're working with the News Revenue Hub. There are.
I'm pointing, Christina's out there from the News Revenue Hub, lest you wonder why I'm randomly pointing at people in the room.
I'm wondering, people have a finite amount of room in their budgets for subscriptions,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so as many of us indie publishers develop reader revenue programs and implement them, do you get a sense that now is the time to do it? Because 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that ship will already have sailed, and those who are looking to do it will need to partner with a larger organization that has already cemented themselves as a place to buy news from.
I mean, you're talking about like a company that will roll up the management of subscriptions.
So let's take a look at it from a Netflix
Yeah.
thing, right? If I'm
Right.
a content producer and I want to
Yeah.
get my video out there, one of the best platforms I could probably put it on is Netflix or an Amazon.
Yeah.
And they sort of control that market. Do
Yeah.
you see it the same way going
Well,
on?
if somebody actually could develop something that controls the market the way Netflix, or has a large part of the market, then you're probably going to have to be on it, whether you start your membership thing now or you start it in 10 years.
And I asked that because I really was impressed with what you did back with TBD. I
Yeah.
was working with you back then,
Yeah.
and as you go into other cities, do you think there's an opportunity for smaller publishers or mid-sized publishers to work with a Belly Pen or to work with,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
to develop that and sort of ride your coattails
Yeah.
in terms of audience? Do you
Yeah,
see that as
like a package, like a bundled membership.
something like that? Yeah.
Yeah. We have discussed that. We haven't gotten very far in it yet because we just launched membership 6 months ago, but we have talked about, because that model, for those who don't know, I had a site in DC 7 years ago that died a relatively sudden and painful death that I still am not sure I understand why, but that's a question for therapy. But we partnered with a lot of small sites in DC and basically built this network of sites that we link to all the time. Scott was involved in that as well. And eventually, and we had a bunch of people who were selling ads onto their sites as well. And then, sadly, it ended. But yes, we have looked at that again because I've always wanted to give that another shot. Some things have changed since then, which is we built a heavy ad model, which we knew with Spirited we did not want to do for reasons we all understand. But no, I'd like to think there are models like that. But I think in our case, we've gotten, like more than 1,500 people to pay to be members of the 3 sites in 6.5, 7 months. And for us, considering we don't market the sites at all, pretty happy with that. So I think if you're producing something of value, people will give. And then if they have to roll up under a aggregator of memberships at some point, then so be it. But right now, I haven't seen that evolve yet. Question in the back, I think, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about mobile and how mobile fits into what you're developing or how it should fit into it?
Oh, I think specifically, all 3 of us? One of you guys go. Yeah, one of you guys go first. I've talked plenty.
Yeah, mobile's the future, and a lot of the publishers we work with are only focusing on mobile. So like on all the sites we manage, all the users, all the analytics, everyone's like 60% or above on mobile, and it's just growing more and more. So
does that include app development, or is that something that can't be scaled, out there?
I don't work with apps because I don't think they're a good idea. So you guys can.
We don't have apps either.
No. Perfectly responsive is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
We designed it. When I'm in the middle of fundraising right now, and when people always pull up your sites on this big screen in this conference room, I'm like, no, just pull it up on your phone. We actually designed it for the mobile phone, so they're always like, oh yeah, it looks really nice on the phone. But people still will look at your site on desktop, so maybe our desktop site should look a little bit better than it does, but it looks fine. But we didn't put that much effort into it because 80% of our audience is coming in via mobile, so why would we design the desktop site why would you pay that much attention to that? So obviously we think it's clearly the future. If anybody who doesn't think mobile is the future, it's because they think it'll get replaced by something else 10 years from now, whatever's post-mobile.
You said 60% for mobile?
Or more.
Or more. Is that the entire U.S. or just your area? Or?
We manage sites that are U.S. based but get global traffic. So that's globally. I see those metrics.
It's gone from Norway and
Yeah.
90%.
Yeah, we have sites that are as high as 90, but I would say the minimum is 60.
But the commercial opportunity around mobile in these categories is really fledgling. Like really understanding the commerce opportunity for people walking by a store, and that's the somewhat trivial example that's used all the time. We are nowhere at the small site level in figuring that out and figuring out the business opportunity around that. Maybe you folks in Norway are ahead of us in that, but we're well behind. A lot to do there.
Yeah, that's why we don't really try to monetize the sites via advertising that much. Try to monetize them offline.
Yeah, you have
events and membership.
Yeah, there's a few companies that work with publishers that will target ads extremely well on mobile. But one of the things probably that Merrill could speak to is like the barrier to entry. They have, the one company I know that I do work with has a $10,000 a month minimum ad spend. So that's prohibitive for a lot of small publishers.
I can't tell you how many conferences I've been to, and it's not this one, but there are, here's how to do social media, here's how to set up a Facebook page, etc. You mentioned, there's so many people spending way too much money on website development. But as you work with your customers, what's that one thing that you always are saying to yourself, you bonehead, you should be doing this, or it's in that you should have already implemented this yesterday? Is there something simpler that people are overlooking, whether they be large or small publishers, that you see all the time?
We waited too long to do membership for sure. I mean, we should have launched it a year before we did.
The industry should have.
Yeah.
Don't feel special.
No, but it was for us. I mean, the industry did too, but we also had built sites that had a lot of voice and had through events. They had a deeper relationship with their audience than the average local newspaper brand does. It's more of a engaged audience, and so we kind of missed that opportunity. And we started chasing. We thought we could scale up events. We scaled up events plenty, but there's a certain level you hit where you can't do any more events with the staff you have. And we just kind of, so that's the biggest mistake I made. If we'd launched it a year earlier, obviously we'd be 12 more months down the road of the number I gave, where I'm happy with at 1,500 might be 5,000 or 7,500 if I'd done it a year earlier. So, that was the biggest miss for me.
But also to take that membership initiative seriously, not just as a technical or business problem, but as a product problem. Like people seem to separate membership, paywall, subscription, registration from the product, what it does and what it needs to be in order to be successful. And that separation has to get collapsed completely because you have to think about your product in the context of reader revenue from a product development point of view and not just from a revenue point of view.
Yeah, and you also have to change. I mean, one of the things I worry that a lot of legacy companies have done is they've changed the model. Like if you're going to go from getting revenue from advertisers and you're going to switch to getting revenue from consumers, like to Merrill's point, like the product has to change. Like the voice you use to talk to people has to change if they're now the people who are going to provide the backbone for your revenue. And I think like a lot of places, it's like they've just transferred who's paying, but they didn't really change the underlying product, which I think is a huge problem. I mean, I think to me, it's even if you look at our pay when you give money. Like, our sites are kind of like we try to write with a little bit of fun, a little bit of an attitude, sometimes a little bit of a poke. But like when you get to the pay money, like the button doesn't, Brian Boyer, who runs product for us, likes to say, like he hates it when he says submit is the button. It just sounds so ominous, submit. And like our button basically says, take my money. So like even the pay process sort of carries the voice of the site all the way through to when somebody clicks the button to give. And I think it's important that there's a nice straight line through like everything you do, whether it's editorial or business or whatever. Like you got to keep your theme together.
And this is to follow up on that point. This is a science now. This is as analytical as anything we do. When to make the ask, what categories to make the ask against, what size is the font, how many pages do you see? There is now a body of thought and data around all this that's really, really important that you all can tap into through what we're doing, what other people are doing. You probably help them manage that as well, right?
Yeah, but can you weigh on the tech side? Because I have a lot of people, hey, why don't you have an app? Why have a responsive site? Why don't you have this? I think it's a lot of people who are told or sold to, marketed to, get around, do this, do that, get us this way. And either they don't do it or they spend too much money on it by doing it. From a tech side, what do you see? The bonehead thing, you bonehead, why are you doing this?
Apps were, I think apps, kind of the love for them are dying out a bit. It's another barrier to entry. You have to get people to use them and install them, and as opposed to just going to your website. And they're very expensive to maintain and update. Apple can require that to be in the store, you have to do an update that costs you $10,000, $15,000 with a developer, or they'll take you out of the store. So that's, people are moving away. There was like an app being developed, Push, but it hasn't been taking off. He was here speaking last year. To me, the bonehead moves are not using someone with experience that actually knows how to set up a site, scale a site, maintain a site, and what works, what doesn't work, how to grow it. Not having a CMS, I think everyone should be on WordPress, but there's some people that run on non-WordPress sites. I think that's a bonehead move.
Me too.
Honesty in there, I love it.
Me too.
You have to have an ad server. If you're doing membership, whether you're using like a news revenue hub, or if you're just doing it on your own to get started, there's proper ways to do that with using Memberful or doing it through WooCommerce or some other. If you're using a paywall, use a good paywall. So those are kind of, I could go on and on. Make sure you have Google Analytics installed.
So what's the breadth of the tech stack that you're each talking about providing? There could be customer relationship management options for advertisers. It could be the ad stack, the ad serving platform.
I can take that one first because we're just getting started, so I don't have the slightest friggin' idea what our tech stack's going to look like. I just know we're going to have one. So you've got one, you're building one, you're farther ahead than I am.
Well, so the critical thing for us is that we have a relationship with a company called Piano. Piano is the leading U.S. provider of registration and paywall services, and through the plugin they're building for our platform, we'll have access to both all of their data and their technology capabilities, and that's the key foundation of our stack. We're not building a video player, we're not building an audio player, there are plenty of ways to do that. We're building on WordPress, we're providing the complete content management interface for that. We're building a dashboard using some proprietary stuff we're creating, but also what's out there, but trying to make it as easy as possible for small publishers to succeed with it. And that's, I guess, the overview. What's missing?
It's pretty good. We use WordPress. Everything we do is using open source, WordPress, stuff you can buy or license. And I believe in using the right product for the right publisher in the right market. So we have publishers that run on Piano, we have publishers that run on Pigeon, and those have different pros and cons depending on your market and your site and what you want to accomplish. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution.
Do you have a point of view on Gutenberg for this audience?
Test your sites.
So Gutenberg is the latest incarnation, the latest thing that WordPress is working on. A number of you know it. It's beautiful in theory, and from what we've seen in it, it allows you to see pages while they're in development. It's a great advance for them. It's elegant, it's fast, it looks really good. We're going to take full advantage of what WordPress is investing in rolling out Gutenberg, and we're going to be using it this fall.
Yeah, we'll be upgrading all sites to Gutenberg. They have a classic editor plugin you can install to test your site out before you switch over. So something with publishers is that's your revenue stream. So just make sure you have a developer or someone if you're not capable of fully testing on a development environment. But test your site so it doesn't go down when it auto updates.
Yeah, I should have at least. We haven't figured out a lot of the requirements piece yet, but on the front end, I think our role in this is largely to help assist in like not the technical migration, but just an advice on how to migrate from whatever you're on to this system should you choose to use it. I think we'll also provide some consulting services, whether it's on, and everybody will have different needs there, but how to create a good newsletter, improve a newsletter, write good headlines, design around, potentially around designing your site around membership. So we're developing what our front end will be, and then News Revenue Hub will sit at the back end to do the membership piece of it as well. And then obviously the requirements piece is the part we're still pulling together.
Teresa?
A question for each of you. A lot of us are one or two person shops, and we're trying to balance a lot of different priorities. And we come to these conferences and we hear people say, "This is the latest and greatest thing. You should be focusing on membership. You should be focusing on a better ad server. You should be doing X, Y, Z." And at the end of the day, we go back and we still have the same pain points that we had when we came, and a limited amount of revenue to invest in a lot of things that everybody is offering, which all seem great if I had all the money in the world, which you don't. So could each of you perhaps address, if you were in somebody like my shoes with all of those pain points, what would be the one thing, looking to the future, knowing what you know now, when you would say, regardless of what product you might individually be selling, just as an objective observer, what would be the one thing you think that we should all be thinking about? Should it be, is it really membership? Is it really newsletters? Will we still be going to a website in 10 years and looking at ads? What should we all be thinking about?
Before we do, everybody's pain point is revenue, obviously.
Well, of course,
but to drill down a little bit beyond that, what is your pain point? You can't get audience. You can't hire people. You can't. Your ad banners aren't working anymore. I mean, people's specific pain points will vary.
But I guess we all want to be successful publishers, and revenue, yes, is a pain point. But we hear a lot of different solutions to that. So let's just start with revenue. What is the one thing?
Reader revenue.
The magic bullet.
A strategy that's product-wide about reader revenue. And one market, either geographic or vertical topic, strategy is not the same as another. That's a thing that needs customization. If you're in a suburb, it's different than when you're in a city. If you're covering energy, it's different than you're covering race. That is the part of things that really needs detailed analysis and product development around it. And reader revenue.
I'd say reader revenue for another reason as well, which is the joy. I haven't been in, whether it was legacy companies I've worked at or other things I've started. Like I've always had ad businesses until this one, and the joy of having a reader revenue, and we still sell advertising, but it's 9% of our revenue this year. And the nice thing about having a reader revenue model is that everything you do journalistically supports your business model. Where at the end of the day, in an ad model, you have to do some things sometimes to get impressions. There's probably a lot of, who paginates in the room? Do people paginate stories at all? Oh, thank God. Nobody does it. But for a while, it's like you had to paginate everything, and you had all the slideshows to, this is more happens at legacy places for sure. But like the places I worked, we were doing all this junk just to get more impressions, and the readers hated it, and we were like, eh. So the nice thing about the reader revenue piece is that when you produce a good piece of journalism, it makes somebody want to become a member more, so your journalism feeds your business, and it's a nice virtuous circle. That's why I think it's important.
David?
And then advertising, by the way, can supplement that and should, but it doesn't have to carry all the freight.
I could just add to that. So the Center for Cooperative Media, I think just published a report, at least I got it by email, saying that 97% of the publications they studied at least still rely on advertising in some form, right? So I think in terms of the focus going forward, I kind of think that, how many years have we come to this conference? And for the first few years, it was diversify revenue sources, right? We're trying to bring as many revenue sources as possible.
Yeah.
I think now that the hope of reader revenue is kind of on the rise, we're starting to see some publishers that are making it work. The idea of abandoning advertising, I think, is crazy because we talk about diversifying for so long. I think advertising is going to be around for a while, and I kind of see like an approach in terms of revenue for publishers going forward. Sponsored content, all right, native advertising being one. I think display is probably going to be around for a long time because it's so easy to execute, and it still brings in a decent amount of revenue and reader revenue. It's really hard to get 1,000 paying subscribers, right? It's a lot easier. 1,000 paying subscribers at $5 a month That's $60,000 a year. That might support like half of the editor. I don't, who knows? So
God.
what if you have to get 2,000 picks for doctors?
Paying editors.
It's a lot easier to find a sponsor, all right, who's going to come in at $500 or $1,000 a month, right? So that's why I think there's probably going to be a divide. I really hope that reader revenue is the answer for news going forward, but I think that advertising is going to play such a huge role in it. So I don't think it can be an end.
I was going to say, until the voice of the ad agency spoke, that thinking about sponsorship in creative ways and looking at public media models, among other things, at how they do it and being smart about that, as opposed to being impression-based, to your point about junk and photo galleries, is really important right now, too. And that's another, I'd say, important point to address the pain point we talked about.
I think in any business, whether you're a publication or you're financial company, whatever you are, you have to be diversified in your revenue. To Kenny's point, so reader revenue is the hottest thing this year for generating money. Last year it was paywalls, programmatic, like the direct sale. Like there's always something, but it's important to be diversified. I think it's important to have a strong newsletter and to be monetizing your newsletter. The most successful publishers we work with are making steady money from their newsletter, from direct sale. Maybe they have some passive or programmatic type ads. Also, they're doing sponsored content, and now they're starting to launch membership programs, or within the past year. So we're working with five sites, maybe a sixth, on News Revenue Hub. They're growing. We have a couple, like Berkshire Edge, Marcy. She launched her own membership program, and it's going well. It's growing steadily. So diversification is extremely important. No matter what it is the hot thing, in no business should, and I do this in my own business, in no business should you ever put all your eggs in one basket.
So,
Scott.
So for the record, we're a completely advertising-driven company, and I can't imagine reader revenue making up. If we were to forego advertising, I can't imagine reader revenue making that up. So I think that's diversification sounds good, but the idea that advertising in it can be around, I'm just not seeing that from the ground from my perspective, because we're getting demand for advertising and it's funding our operation. But I think what this discussion brings up is that people in this room across the country, we're all doing things very different. And this conversation, I believe, is about content management systems. And the idea that I've seen for a while, I think a lot of people have seen, is that we're all sort of reinventing the wheel technology-wise, and spending money developing custom WordPress things when really there are commonalities of the things we use, and there should be.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
Scale possible.
Yes.
However, the thing that I always get hung up on this when I think about it is that just the breadth of how different our operations are. I personally run on a blog style format where all the articles are on the homepage, and I'm mostly advertising, and I do that bunch of content in a certain way, and this all has custom developed stuff, and then I see someone else doing it, and they're all doing it different ways. So how do you account for all the different ways people do things without introducing too much bloat into a system?
Well, I was actually going to make the respond to the man from the ad agency in the corner to say that it is very interesting to see where community sites are doing well with revenue, or where local weekly newspapers are thriving, or where they're collapsing. And it seems, and this is utterly anecdotal, that there's no pattern to any of that. Where it's working and where it's not is not necessarily about affluence. It's not necessarily about availability of transportation. It's not exactly about commuting in suburbs. There's a whole lot of things that are happening out there. I just had a couple of conversations with community newspaper people who are potential customers of my companies, and their success and failure stories don't seem to have much consistency around them. Where it's the community newspaper continues to work and where it's failing doesn't seem to be based on demographics or anything else. So yes, markets are different, and I totally agree with that. And advertising seems to work some places, and for reasons that are somewhat inexplicable, doesn't work other places.
Yeah, but
And I interrupted.
Scott's point, like, how how do you develop a custom solution that's broad enough for everybody to use before it begins to look like patch?
What's wrong with looking like patch?
Big problem.
What's wrong with looking like patch?
Because every community is different.
Well, that's being like patch, not looking like patch.
Well, in my mind, it's almost one and the same. But that's just me. But to answer the point about Scott's bloat, right?
Yeah.
How do you be as customizable without doing a one-size-fits-all model?
Well, I think there's definitely a trade-off. The model we're looking at here is that part of what's being funded is the development of the system, but also the subsidization of it, so that people can use it for a much smaller amount per month than they're probably paying now. But you'd be lying if you said the trade-off of that wasn't that you're working within some framework. That's not. You can't just say I want this, I want that. So if doing custom development is something you just feel like you've got to have and you've got to have forever, either this isn't the right system, or we're trying to figure out whether you have to build this into it to say, look, if you want some custom development on top of this, then that's something you have to pay additional for. But we're not gonna. It's not like everybody who says, "Oh, I want that feature," we're putting it in. It's like it's got to be narrowed down to in some ways you got to poll your potential consumers and figure out what are the things that have broad appeal and what are the things that have narrow appeal, and keep the narrow appeal things out, put the things that have broad appeal in, and then if you need to do development on top of that, that's one of the things we have to sort out. But I think the idea is that you're paying less for something and you're losing some flexibility. Just the reality of the way the model works. So it's not going to get bloated because we're going to say yes to every idea somebody has. There's got to be some framework for narrowing it down to something manageable.
What's the difference between what you're proposing and something that a more traditional publisher, Town News, has been offering as a tech stack for people to use?
No, the answer is I don't know yet because we haven't built it yet. But I think the idea is we're going for, and they serve a lot of small sites as well. They also serve some larger ones. We're trying to keep it pretty narrow and pretty small, so that the sites we're going after are like newsrooms that are 7 and smaller. So that'll limit some of the feature set in it because you don't need you don't need everything that's in even Town News. There are things in there that are better used for larger newsrooms than smaller newsrooms, and we'll keep those out.
You talk about the survey thing. How do you go about surveying your readers, and how are you targeting what it is that they want, that you want to be able to have them pay for as readers?
That's the first step in the process, is actually doing the surveying of what are people using now, what are they paying now, what are the features they use most, and just trying to even not everybody, because they probably don't have the time to do it for everybody, but selecting some subset of people who literally sit and watch them use it for some period of time. Because one of the things that's fascinating is when you ask people what they use in their CMS and they tell you, and then you watch them use it for a while, it doesn't always match up. There are things that become so routine and such wallpaper that you don't realize how often you're doing this thing, because it feels like it's almost not it doesn't feel like it's a big deal to you, but you do it 100 times a day, and there might be a way to do it more efficiently. So we want to sit and watch people actually use their system for a while and see what are the pain points and what are the even just the shortcuts that people use. So we're certainly going to do some surveys. You probably
and Facebook and the News Revenue Hub and others in these experiments that are going on right now are trying to develop templated, easy to deploy surveys to help with that. There's a lot going on in that regard right now. The Facebook experiment just had a big meeting in Austin with 30 publishers from around the country or some number like that. And they seem to be wanting to resource all that and make it really easy for smaller publishers to do this. Easier and cheaper, obviously.
Yeah. And we participated in that Facebook membership push, and it was the membership accelerator, and it was actually really good. Because it wasn't about how to use Facebook to increase membership. They brought in a bunch of other people to talk about loyalty and how to build customer loyalty from other industries. And
were you in Austin for this thing?
My whole team was. I was not. But the reports they got back were quite surprising.
This was last weekend or 2 weeks ago that Facebook's really investing in that in the interest, apparently, of the wider community and not in the Facebook platform, as Jim said. Really interesting work that's going on.
Yeah.
So I made one of the bonehead decisions, which I'm very happy with. And 5 years ago, we chose to work in a walled garden. We're on Town News, and it has all of its limitations. But I will say, just sort of personal experience, I have had not one in 5 years, no reader ever has come to me and complained about anything technical on our website. They don't tell me about the fonts I chose, or the colors I chose, or the way that, all the limitations that Town News has, because there are. It is not as extensible as WordPress, and there's all kinds of things. But I'm really interested in what you're doing, because we made a conscious decision to say we are not going to be a technology company. We are going to be a content and journalism company. And that will determine whether we're successful. And we are going to live with whatever limitations Town News has. And we picked them because at the time they were the only walled garden. They were the only people that came to us and said, we can give you an ecosystem where you really don't have to think a ton about what your integration of your ad server and your email system is and how you're going to make all that stuff work together. They took our launch time. It was, and I don't mean that it was the quality of Town News. I mean it was the concept of saying, just generate the content and serve the reader. And we will help you build the foundation to take care of the rest of it. So what I'm driving at, the question is, inside the tech stack that you're building, what I've heard right now is that there's going to be a CMS and there will be probably a membership component to that. I think about Broad Street, Google DFP, customer management systems. How do I work with? What's the integration on email or newsletters? What other components, when you guys think about what you're building, where else are you focused in terms of saying, yeah, we're totally not going to do this, but these 5 things we know we have to be able to build this to make it so that a small 2-person shop looks at it and goes, that's what I want to build my company.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, we're already putting together a list of vendors. I'm sure these guys already have that, but we're obviously ad serving, analytics, email delivery, CRM. So obviously that's not all going to get built in, but we're already making a list of. The whole idea of this is that we're not picking vendors. Like you're not going to have we don't use DFP. I mean, you don't have to use DFP. You don't have to use. You can use Parsley. You can use Chartbeat. So it's not. We're not trying to say you must. Here's the system, and here are the 4 vendors that you have to use if you use it. The idea is that nobody gets to determine who the vendors are. That you can pick. You can pick who you're using already, assuming it's somebody common enough that it's integrated in. But I think in most cases they are.
I was just going to say we think the underappreciated wild card in all this is user experience, which is often confused with user interface, and that the user experience, especially in a world of customized advertising and reader revenue, is really, really important. And how the page is constructed, as opposed to whether it has a red swish or a blue swish, is increasingly important in this world, and user experience matters. And you've probably crafted it very well using Town News if what you're saying is correct about how you're maximizing it. But it's really important and can't be confused or obliterated by people wanting to make things pretty.
Can you talk about price point, potential price point?
I mean, we're good. I think the idea with ours is that we'd be looking at subsidizing it down to something like $500 or $1,000 a month or something like that.
We're talking about $5,000 a month for nonprofits, with much room to discuss that depending on what services you want.
Are you only doing nonprofits?
No, we're doing for-profits at $10,000.
Interesting. My pricing is different because I'm a developer. So we have publishers that pay $500 a month. We have publishers that pay $10,000 a month. So, and we build websites from 5,000 to 100,000. So it's all we do all custom proposals and quoting. It's a lot different. It's not an out of the box solution.
Or an in the box solution.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Right.
It's not a box.
I'm in the box. We're a box. You can pay up front for the box X $1,000 and then $5,000 a month. And if you do nothing to it, we'll just give it to you and we'll help you use it. We'll customize it if you want, and it'll cost you more money. But the goal is to make it cheap.
And maybe to add one thing to Jay's thing before the question to the back. It's also part of our stack is also because I think Merrill hit on this before, and I actually agree with his take on it. That the faster we get to a post-technology part of local journalism, the better. In the end, I think technology can be quite useful, but I also think if you spend too much time on it, you're obviously getting in the way of what's actually going to build a reader revenue model. And I think like I've gone to a couple of conferences to talk about what we're doing. And like I go to this mobile Me and You conference a few times, and everybody's showing this amazing stuff they're doing with like, you know,
Snowfall.
yeah, snowfall, or showing what they're doing with virtual reality. And I'm like, I just have a bunch of sites that have news on them, you know, but the user experience is clean and people can read the stories easily and donate money easily. But I'm just like, why am I embarrassed by that? I'm doing exactly what I need to do. I don't need to show off flashy technology. I just need to build sites people like and will use. But we also want to add to that the front end of it, which is a little bit of the intel and like an example for us is I think we have pretty smart people who understand digital and understand local journalism. But Christina and Mary had to push the hell out of us to like ask for money as much as we do. Like journalists stink at asking for money. Like, even if you go to the Guardian, which has like 500,000 members, their ask is like, "Would you mind if we bother you for a second? So you might give us a few."
Sorry to bother you.
I'm sorry to bother you. Like it's like they're almost embarrassed to ask. I mean they're the Guardian, so they're still killing it. So, but I mean like I think like we had to be pushed to ask more and to be blunt. Like if you want us to exist, please help us survive. Like literally, not just like your work goes toward helping our reporters do the work. It's like, no, be stark. And I think like that works. It really works for us. And I think like, so there's things that everybody, I think we can all learn. And I think we want to round some of that stuff up on the front end to say like, you know, here are some of the things you have to do to have a successful site.
I agree with you absolutely about technology being secondary. It should be secondary. But I just wanted to go back to a point that I think Merrill made about there being a science to all these things about user experience, about attracting members, about payment systems, all this. And one of the lessons of the Facebook Accelerator that was drummed into those of us who participated is it's all about testing. So an orange button may work for the Boston Globe, but a blue button may work for the Berkeley side. There's no universal law that says this is the way everyone is going to respond. You need to test and see what works for you. I'd be suspicious of people that say this is going to be the ideal process for you because you might be different.
But there are learnings about things ranging from font size to when to ask that you would factor into your testing. And there's more and more data about that today. There was no data about it 10 years ago. There's a lot of data today.
It's all about data, absolutely, and making decisions based on data.
But testing, to your point too, like testing a couple of different ways. Yeah.
And to see what data is.
How did Merrill? I want to dive a little deeper into your pricing model because we led off with we want to build a tech stack that allows more small news sites to participate in the news economy and to proliferate and grow. I want to make sure I'm paraphrasing you. I want to make sure that was what I heard you guys.
I would only refine that to say smallish.
Smallish.
Yeah.
You probably know where I'm going.
We're not priced for the two-person news site with $50,000 a year in revenue.
How much research and data did you look into when you came up with that pricing model? Because I would argue from out in the woods doing this work every day, you're not priced for a lot of line members in terms of what the overall cost is.
I would agree that we're not priced for a lot, but I think there are Lion members who are spending $50,000 a year doing things that we could do for our price or less more efficiently and allowing them to focus on what really matters, i.e. the words on the screen.
And understand, I'm saying that as a potential huge fan. I just would want to understand more about what that, like how that costing, it's feedback from the audience, right? It's data for you to walk away with it. I think that I would want to know more about what's coming in there, and so that I can figure out as a business owner, okay, let me look at all of the time and energy, like what amount of time and how much value do I put on that? Am I spending on this that I'm no longer going to have to spend? Because I might find that, oh yeah, sure, I'm rolling up $5,000 a month or $6,000 a month total. That yeah, it all evens out, but if you're simply going to lay yours next to a CMS, a competing CMS, and that's going to be it'll be an interestingly difficult case to make, I think.
To rank and file very small Lion members in the short term, for sure. But one of the things we want to do with this pricing system is to build a solid enough business so that we can have multiple pricing tiers that take advantage of the smaller publisher marketplace. So we get that. But if you look at the next step up the ladder, if you will, to INN, there are a lot of INN members who can afford what we're talking about. I would say easily the majority of them. And there's more and more money flowing into the world of INN from lots of places, and a lot of those places who are writing those checks to INN members these days of some scale, Craig Newmarks and the others of the world, certainly are focused on technology and certainly want easy to implement solutions. That's part of our plan and our thinking.
I just want to mention one thing you said about asking for money.
Yeah.
I'm a freelancer, but I work for a small newspaper in the mid-Norway, about municipality of 5,000 people. And they basically went out and said that if you don't get any more subscribers, your local newspaper will die.
Yeah.
Very, very, very successful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, especially, it's one of the struggles because the reader wasn't paying the freight for a long time. In fact, they didn't even realize how much what they were paying for the newspaper was subsidized for such a long time. So the advertising went away, and suddenly we were charging them 10 times as much for the newspaper as we were when it was twice as big. Like, we didn't really explain why that happened to them, and so they got. So I think the more straight you can be about, remember that famous National Lampoon cover of the, buy this magazine or this dog will die, and it was a picture of somebody holding a gun to a puppy. That's essentially like what you sort of have to do sometimes. Just be like, if you want us to be here, you got to help.
So, and by the way, to your point could also have been addressed to him because his colleague just published an article stating how great it would be to start a news site for $500,000.
Yeah.
Which not part of the Lion cohort probably could only fantasize about as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you for that completely unnecessarily and unrelated shot at something we weren't even talking about, Merrill. I appreciate that.
I've launched news sites for under $5,000.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend that much money. And,
I gotta give you the hook.
All right.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay up there.
Thank you all.